I have just 23 minutes to grade how realistic the map of Skyrim is, or else Todd Howard is gonna lock me away in this dungeon and do unspeakable things to me.
It just works.
I think I better start. Welcome to Skyrim, a place so large that it covers 40 square kilometers or 15 square miles for us Americans. That's about the same area as the island of Manhattan, or half the size of GTA 5's map, or 1/18,000th of a Texas. So it's not the largest map, but it does beg the question of realism. To the casual observer, the Arctic lands of Skyrim may seem a little samey with various amounts of mountains, foliage, rivers, and snow, but in truth, the northernmost area of Tamriel holds 7 distinct geological and environmental locations. But first, we gotta talk about the general shape of Skyrim, because it kinda looks like a bowl. A bowl filled with mountain-shaped marshmallows and powdered sugar snow, but a bowl nonetheless, as it is surrounded by mountains on nearly all sides, and dips down flatter towards the center. Yep, that tastes like Todd. So is this shape realistic? Well, yeah, there are many possible explanations for their formation, but there are 3 that I want to laser in on as the most likely. The most obvious to consider is that the land is being forced upward by 2 tectonic plates just bashing into each other. So for example, the surrounding regions of Morrowind, Cyrodiil, Hammerfell, and High Rock may have been their own separate land masses. And over millions of years, they collided with Skyrim to form the continent of Tamriel we know and explore in all the re-releases of the Elder Scrolls games. The next possibility is volcanic activity. Now this one does sound crazy considering that there are no volcanoes in Skyrim. But I'm not referring to current day activity. Take a look at the geysers and sulfur pits in Eastmarch. Their existence means that some minor volcanic activity currently exists in Skyrim. So even though I get no bars here, there must be some kind of hotspot below the dragon-stuffed crust of Skyrim. So it's possible in the distant past, over a long period of time, eruptions from this hotspot formed the mountains of Skyrim as the land shifted above it. This would be quite similar to how the Hawaiian Islands were formed in real life. And the last explanation for the general shape of Skyrim is that it was formed by glacial drift, which is the most likely for, well, obvious reasons. Skyrim may have been covered in glaciers weighing millions of tons way in the past. And as they receded over millions of years, the heavy retreating ice carved out the land to be less mountainous than its borders, though not fully flattened. This would be similar to the lands of Scandinavia, for example. With all that yapping done, I'd like to comment on these possibilities because personally, I subscribe to the idea that the general shape of Skyrim was formed by a combination of all 3. So let's imagine it. First, tectonic collisions formed the mountains at the borders, and then volcanic hotspots created mountains within Skyrim, and glaciers crushed some of these mountains as they formed and retreated. Kind of like an ice cheese grater. The shredded mountains really enhanced the flavors. I'm dropping Cheerios everywhere for this. Now with that out of the way, I want to start with my favorite of the 7 geological areas, Winterhold. It's my favorite because it has some interesting lore connected to how it looks. And YouTube viewers love lore more than they love the metal pipe falling sound effect. So listen as I explain how realistic it is. So about 80 years before the game starts, Winterhold was devastated by an event called the Great Collapse, where a series of strong storms suddenly slammed against the coast. These torrents were so terrible they eroded most of the city away crazy fast. But miraculously, the College of Winterhold stayed standing through it all. These storms led to the look of Winterhold that we see today in-game, with jagged rocky terrain, icy ground, and snow. And to this day, some of the nerds at the college speculate that the eruption of Red Mountain in Morrowind directly led to the destabilization of the land, thus weakening it for the storms.
You dork. Go back to the chess club.
However, that volcanic explosion happened 117 years before the Great Collapse, so many people just think they're stupid. But I'm here to tell you that they were correct. Somewhat. The main reason for the Great Collapse is right in the area's name. Winterhold. The whole area was held together by ice. You see, long ago, when the glaciers I mentioned earlier receded, they tore up the rocks, leaving cracks within the cliffs that were further cracked by ice, but also stabilized by it, kind of like a glue or concrete, that made it really hard to break apart the rocks. It's kind of like when you have 2 flat Lego pieces stuck together, so then you need to bring out one of those orange doohickeys to break them apart. That's the level of stabilization we're talking about. But as the area warmed up due to the climate changes of the planet, this glue weakened. Then add a seismic event like a volcano erupting on the continent, and powerful winds and seawater eroding the land. It eventually gave way and destabilized, utterly destroying the housing market of Winterhold. It was a bad time for Skyrim Wall Street that day. Fortunately, the college was built on solid bedrock, which protected it from the Great Collapse. And the rock in-game kinda looks like some forms of bedrock, to be honest. And for those of you that don't know what that is, bedrock is an indestructible block found in all 3 dimensions and cannot be obtained as an item in survival? What? Oh, sorry guys, I was reading the Minecraft wiki by accident. Chicken jockey. A real-world example of what happened in Winterhold would be the Storega slides, which, while not exactly the same thing, were huge underwater landslides that occurred in Norway 8,000 years ago, and they were likely triggered by a mix of unstable rock left by the glaciers and earthquakes. Then as for the weather, it's cold because it's up north, and really snowy due to the ocean and wind currents bringing in moist air inland. So all of that makes sense. Nice work, Todd. Next, let's move on down south to Whiterun, the home of this jerk.
Do you get to the Cloud District very often? Oh, what am I saying? Of course you don't.
This area is filled with rolling hills, fertile soil for farming, and tons of bandits. I can explain 2 of these 3. I would need to make a socioeconomic video to explain why there are just so many bandits. Whiterun is what I like to call an intermountain basin. This means that it's a low-lying area between mountain ranges, aka the throat of the world and the bordering mountain ranges. This lower area is more flat and less rocky than the other areas on the map, and can be explained by our old friends, the glaciers, somewhat smoothing it out compared to other zones of Skyrim. And in addition to all of that, the area was filled in with sediment from glacial meltwater. This sediment would be rich in potassium, magnesium, and more, making it a great place for plants to grow, which would further break down the smaller rocks left by the glaciers, thus eventually turning this place into a farmer's paradise. Minus the dragons, bandits, and dragonborn stealing all their crops. This is especially true since many fruits and veggies in Skyrim require such minerals, such as berries, grapes, and apples. You know, if Skyrim had any apple trees, thankfully, mods have that covered. So surprisingly, this place is pretty realistic so far. Now on to the weather. Whiterun experiences moderate rain and snow, unless you're me trying to record footage for this video, in which case, it rains every dang day. The reason Whiterun doesn't receive even more precipitation than it already does is because it's more inland, as well as because of the rain shadow effect, which, despite sounding like a Naruto jutsu, is a real thing. To put it simply, this effect is when big rocks like mountains block moist wind and precipitation from one side, thus leading to dry winds descending on the other side of the mountain. This doesn't prevent all rain from entering an area, but in all honesty, it should prevent a little bit more in-game, because this is ridiculous. There's more waterworks here than my first time watching the opening of Up. And there were a lot of waterworks that day. But the unrealistic rain is great for growing crops. An IRL parallel for the rain shadow effect would be the Sierra Nevada mountains, with the western side getting more rain than the east. Then being more inland, it experiences clearer skies and more seasonal climates than areas more up north would have. Okay, that is Whiterun finished. Next on the list is a 2-for-1 special with Eastmarch and the Rift. I grouped these zones together because of this beautiful cliff, because it holds the key to how realistic the zones were formed. To the uninitiated, this is just a normal everyday cliff, but for me, with my College of Winterhold education, is much more. And don't ask why I attended a mage guild to study rocks, I get enough of that from my parents. This cliff is what is called a fault scarp from a crustal fault zone. You see, in some places when 2 tectonic plates meet, one side, named the hanging wall, falls into a depression. Aw, poor guy. We've all been there. While the other side, named the foot wall, ascends up slightly, if at all. This creates a noticeable sudden slope like this cliff we see in game. So what we got here is a California-like situation. And by that, I don't mean the always being on fire kind of situation or the having trash everywhere kind of situation. Seriously guys, pick up your trash. What I mean is its situation with fault lines and the San Andreas Fault, as it too is a kind of crustal fault zone. It's not a perfect one-to-one as it's a horizontal zone rather than a vertical one, but I just wanted a chance to dunk on California. They have had it too good with the weather, so just give me this. A better IRL example would be the East African Rift Valley, with its sloped cliffs and non-sloped valleys. So yeah, I really like this cliff, and I swear if anyone says in the comments something like, actually, this cliff was made when two gods had a sandcastle building contest, and this is what remains of it, or something like that, I'm gonna lose it. This video is about how realistic things are. Sometimes lore just isn't realistic. I got enough of that when I forgot that dragons made dueling peaks back in my Breath of the Wild video. Dragons are not realistic, guys. But in all seriousness, I do love hearing about lore that I don't know about, so actually do tell me things that I missed. I love reading those comments. Okay, that is enough on this big, beautiful cliff. Now let's get into detail on the individual areas, starting with Eastmarch and explaining how realistic the hot springs are. I'm not trying to make one of those Skyrim ranking videos, but this place is an easy S tier for coziness. You've got the lovely light going through the trees, the gushing geysers, and the tranquil thermal hot springs. It really makes you feel like one of those hot spring monkeys in Japan. Except in reality, if I was walking through here, it'd be less of a nice stroll and more of a midnight walk through Detroit, because I'd be dead within seconds because of the silent killer of hydrogen sulfide. Let me be clear. This pool, now that's a hot spring. But these pools, no sir, those are sulfur pits chock full of acidic liquids. And the gases released by them very well may be hydrogen sulfide, which can kill in minutes or seconds if inhaled in high concentrations. Fortunately, much like your average League of Legends player, this gas is pretty dense, so it's heavier than air, making it stay closer to the ground. But I wouldn't risk walking through this place if it was real, just in case the concentration is too high. And the amount of mammoth skulls around here makes me think that the concentration is indeed too high. And chemistry fun fact, when silver comes into contact with hydrogen sulfide that's in the air, a black coating is produced. So hypothetically, if the Dragonborn was wielding a silver sword when going through here, it would become darker right before he suddenly collapsed due to the fumes. Unfortunately, the god with the bod, Todd Howard, doesn't have a degree in chemistry, as he put all of his points into charisma, so he didn't code in that chemical reaction into the game. Now what exactly makes these seductive sulfur pits and homely hot springs, huh? Well, that would be underground volcanic activity, baby. Deep below Eastmarch is what is known as a mantle hotspot. That means underground, there's a column of molten rock rising up and melting portions of Skyrim's crust, forming a magma chamber kilometers below Eastmarch. This magma then gets all hot, melting material and heating groundwater until eventually it can hold back no more. And finally it bursts, forming geysers, hotspots, and sulfur pits. If you're thinking, wow, that sounds like what happens in Yellowstone, then you'd be right. In the past, these sulfur pits and hot springs may have been more active and maybe even larger, and could have caused volcanic eruptions as Skyrim drifted over the hotspot, leading to some of the various mountains inland. But based on how weak the geysers are now, it's definitely in a more dormant state today. So I'm sorry to say there is no super eruption for Skyrim anytime soon. But as for the point of realism, the existence of geysers and pits are fine. What's not fine is the amount of life found in these zones. Too often can we find people, animals, and plants just right next to these pits, when in reality it wouldn't be able to support plant life, and it would kill or at least scare away the animals. Sure, it has a lot of mammoth skulls just lying around to make the place feel a bit more deadly, but like a grandma hopped up on Adderall, it's a bit too lively here. Seriously, grandma, you're gonna hurt yourself. You can't have trees right next to these geysers. The acidity, boiling water, and more would destroy them over time. I mean, think about it. If I was constantly pouring boiling water on you, you'd probably get away from me, right? Either that or just scream on the ground. You can, however, have trees somewhat nearby, but not right next to the geysers. Again, similar to what we see in Yellowstone. And Yellowstone's not even as dangerous as I'm assuming Eastmarch to be. So I'm sorry to say, it's a bit unrealistic in that regard. As for the climate and weather of Eastmarch, it's surrounded by mountains which block wind currents, keeping it insulated from colder winds outside the region. And mix that with the heat from the thermal activity, it's likely a somewhat humid and warm environment. But also thanks to the mountains and our friend the rain shadow effect, it receives less precipitation. Honestly, the climate and hot springs would make this an excellent honeymoon spot for Skyrim couples if it wasn't for the deadly gases. That is unless you want to easily assassinate your spouse. The sulfur pits will make body disposal a breeze, as it dissolves all of the evidence. Thanks, sulfuric acid. And by the way, this is a real depiction of sulfuric acid from a show called Dr. Stone. If you like science and non-cringy anime, check it out. Alright, on to the rift. In truth, it's not that interesting geologically speaking. It's the footwall side of the fault, as I mentioned earlier, and it has mountains due to tectonic plates bumping into each other here. Simple, realistic stuff. But what I do like about the rift is Lake Haafingar. Now, normally you'd expect a region surrounded by mountains not to get enough rain to support a large lake and river system. And you'd be right. So did Todd get this setup wrong? Not quite. Because he didn't set this area up with the idea of rain supplying water to the lake. Because my man Todd doesn't make mistakes. The QA team does, but not him. Rather than rain, it's snow that fills the lake. During the winter months, snow and ice will build up on the bordering mounds. Then come summer, the snow and ice will experience greater rates of melting, thus supplying water to the lake and river system that cuts through the east of Skyrim. The river then carries nutrients, sediment, and life-giving water to the areas it goes through. Except that's a lie.
It's false. No way. Not this time. Pure fiction.
I thought that the water system ran from the lake and up north, but in actuality it starts from a split in the river and goes to the lake and up north. See how the water wheel is spinning towards the lake and not away from it? That means that water's flowing into it, so it's not supplying a reservoir of water for the river system like I initially thought. Meltwater is still the supply to the river system, but it also builds up in this lake that traps additional water. Now, this isn't a fully impossible river setup, but it is a very improbable one, so it's not the most realistic. Then as for the climate in the rift, it's a bit colder here than it is in Whiterun due to the elevation, but overall it's a pretty calm environment, with not too many storms thanks to the mountains blocking much of the precipitation and strong winds. And the large lake can act like a heated blanket to the nearby city of Riften, with a warming effect, specifically by absorbing heat during the day and emitting said heat at night, keeping the area a little bit warmer. This is a real thing. In real life, coastal and lakeside towns are a bit more warm than their surrounding areas, for example. This is also how Rito Village works in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, which I explained in my last video in this format. Check it out if you want. Let's now move on over to the opposite side of Skyrim to Haafingar and see how realistic the mountain range is. This mountain range is formed due to the Skyrim tectonic plate coming into collision with the High Rock plate to the west, raising the land into the jagged peaks that these mad lads built the city of Solitude on. Guys, this is so unsafe. Just a bit more erosion or an earthquake and this place is going down faster than my self-esteem went on Instagram. Geologically speaking, that's really all this place has going for it. A+ realism. But I need to point out the river running underneath Solitude. How long do you think it took for the water to carve out that rock formation? Well, with the power of math, we can answer that. Maybe. Depending on many factors, rivers can cut through rock at a rate of 0.1 to 10 millimeters per year. This rock looks tough, but not the toughest like limestone or sandstone, so let's assume that it cuts through at a rate of 3 millimeters a year. Next, let's assume that the rock face has a thickness of around 100 meters. Because that seems pretty reasonable to me. So 100 meters divided by 3 millimeters per year gives us 33,000 years for the water to carve out the rock. Assuming constant erosion, no other geographic events occurring, and that the change in the shape of the rock over time does not reduce the erosion rate, that is. That estimation is honestly worthless, but I just wanted a chance to talk about this awesome rock formation, and comment on the fact that the Mad Lads of Solitude built a blue palace over it. That's almost as stupid as people who buy houses like this. Now for the weather. This area is cold due to its elevation and due to it being up north, but it's not as cold as you might think due to the heat retention of the ocean, similar to what happened with the lake in the rift. But it's still pretty cold, not gonna lie. This area also acts as a barrier to the winds from the west reaching Hjaalmarch, stabilizing its climate a bit. And speaking of Hjaalmarch, that's our next area. This place is similar to a swamp or a bog, and realistically, it can look like this due to a series of geographic events. First, the glacial period initially smoothed it out. Second, what little wind did make it into the region provided additional erosion. And third, melted ice that flowed down the surrounding mountains further eroded the land. The shape of the land must have made it into a poorly drained depression, and as more water entered the zone from the mountains, the area became the wetlands that we see in-game. This is similar to the Great Dismal Swamp in Virginia, or the lowlands of Finland, but not an exact match. To be honest, finding a place like this IRL that's so close to a snowy mountain range wasn't possible for me, so this may be an unrealistic placement. But let me know if you know of any place like this so close to a mountain range, because I don't know everything on Earth. Yet. It's not that big of a deal though, since I've always assumed that the map of Skyrim is a compressed down version of what it's meant to be like in lore. So it's no big deal that this bog is so close to a mountain range in game. Next, let's talk about the ground. It's possible that it's composed primarily of shale, metamorphic rock mixed with clay, or any number of non-porous materials, which prevents the water from draining. This also makes the place terrible for most crops, which is reflected in game. Even plants that enjoy high amounts of water would probably find surviving in a place like this difficult, due to the water likely being acidic. And it would be acidic due to all the dead organic materials that's gonna be inside of it, like plants, animals, or corpses disposed of by people too far from the sulfur pits to dispose of them there. Then as for the weather, it's a pretty cool and misty area year-round, which makes sense considering the high amounts of water exposed to sunlight that's going to evaporate it. And honestly, this place would suck to be in between the weather and all the insects the still water would spawn. Alright, with that area done, it's time to move on to our last area, the Reach. The main thing to address is the massive canyon-like formation with the river running through it. We already established that the Skyrim plate is hitting another tectonic plate to the west, so why is there a huge canyon here and not just another mountain range? Is this unrealistic? Well, I saved this place for last because it's gonna take a little bit of explaining. So let me paint you a picture of the events that would have created this area. First is that the plate collision would form mountains here. Next, we know that glaciers formed and receded in Skyrim, so it would have smoothed out the area, but not enough to create a canyon. And so that brings us to event 3, a lot of river erosion. There's a river down there, so it must have been putting in the work. Think the Grand Canyon or the Rhine Gorge, for example. The only issue with this idea is how jagged the sides of the canyon are. If it was formed by a river, it would be more smooth, not perfectly mind you, but a bit more than it's seen in game. Now I could make an even more complex explanation that allows for this, but that's even more unrealistic to occur before the plates shift even more, altering the land more drastically. So this place is semi-realistic in my opinion. Then as for the weather here, it's pretty typical, being cool and wet due to receiving water, which feeds into the river. Looking at the map of Skyrim with the information that we know, it's pretty realistic if we assume that it's a scaled down version of what it looks like in lore, with a few places that are a tad off the mark. But real quick, I have one more thing to explain, and that's the literal drawn on the map borders of Skyrim. Stay with me here. You ever wonder why a country's borders are the way that they are? Usually they're set by geographic features that prevent groups from passing, like rivers or mountains. And so cultures spring up between these features because humans stick together, and nobody wants to cross a big river just to maybe set up a new place to live. I've played the Oregon Trail. You either die of dysentery or the river takes you out. So I love the fact that the map of Skyrim followed this line of thought by having natural barriers form the basis for the borders on the map. This border rule applies to most countries, and even applies to the earliest states in the USA. See how they're all weird shapes? That's because some of them are set by rivers or other land formations. This doesn't apply to some of the newer states because around 200 years ago, people just really quickly needed to draw some property lines, and the easiest line to draw is a straight one. And so that is the entire map of Skyrim. I give it an A- for realism, so well done, Todd. And time. Oh no, I'm sorry I went over time, Todd. Come on, man, I gave your map above a B. Can't you just let me go? I did what you wanted me to do. I praised Skyrim even more. Please, Todd!
Who's laughing now?
Sometimes it doesn't just work.
Well, looks like I'm gonna be in here for a while, so like, subscribe, and comment any other games you want me to check out, or any other ideas you want me to look into. And I have a Discord now, so if you would like to join it, link in the description. Oh, and the next video is going to be on Fallout New Vegas and how many steps it takes for the courier to save the Mojave. But until then, I hope y'all have a great rest of the day, and stay awesome, y'all. Is someone going to bring me food or something? Todd? Anyone?